Welcome to another episode of our Aquarium Online Academy. My name is James. I work here in the Education Department down in the Aquarium in the Pacific in Long Beach. I have Allie over on question control for our program today, and Alicia is helping control all the magic behind me here and in front of me here. See? You get to participate. So it's not just me talking at you through the power of the internet. You get to ask us questions during our program today about food webs. We're going to be learning what they are. What does that mean? How does it all work? So you can text us questions right here at this number, 562-286-1838, and Allie will be able to answer as many as we can during our program. We'll bring some into the studio. If your question doesn't get answered right away, hang in there. We'll make sure that we answer them at some time. Now, if you're not watching live Monday morning, you can still ask us questions. We have an email down here, live@lbaop.org, and you can email us questions that you didn't get to get in while we were sharing the program live. Well, we have picked a very specific ecosystem to show off a food web. There's a lot of terms that we're probably going to use during the program today, so I'll make sure to explain them all, but if you need more clarification, text Allie. Let's start by being scientists together, because we all are. We all make observations and then question things and test it out. So what kind of questions can you come up with from your observations in this exhibit? What do you notice going on in here? Let's see if we can start to build some ideas about food webs inside an ecosystem. When we look at a habitat, this is a self-contained ecosystem. An ecosystem is really how we define it. What area are we going to call that ecosystem? What conditions are we saying exist in there? So this is a self-contained version of a kelp forest. That's the ecosystem we're focusing on. Well, kelp forests actually span quite a bit of distance along our western coastline here in North America. But in each area, there might be different food webs. All right, so we're using a lot of terms, but what does this all mean? Well, the food web is how we kind of observe or take note of how energy moves through an ecosystem. Now, it does cycle, but we got to start somewhere. So where do you think the bottom of a food web would be? Is it the big fish? Are they the start of everything in here? Is it the fun eel coming to say hello? Swim is so goofy. I love it. Well, what could be starting our ecosystem? Let's see if our eel friend can help point it out. Never mind. They're going off screen. But I'll give you a hint. It's kind of the same color as the eel. While we're thinking of the bottom, Miss Amador's class is texting in, actually skipping ahead to the top of the food web. Well, don't worry. We'll get to the top of the food web. Because in this case, we want to work from the bottom up. If we work backwards, you can still get all the right answers, but it doesn't really explain how everything kind of builds in this system. So we'll start from the bottom, and then we'll get to the top. So what's the first thing that we might think of that starts the ecosystem? If you think about a land-based habitat, let's say the local park, your backyard, a forest, what's really the part that's at the bottom of the ecosystem? Well, Ricky is making some observations with us. Ricky's seeing lots of fish. Well, the fish aren't that part yet. They're in the middle. All right, so that's another hint. Someone's actually asking about where I'm thinking. I'm thinking of the kelp, the seaweed, and the seagrasses. So Ms. Amador's class is right there. We're thinking of the plants and the seaweed and the algae. Like the land-based ecosystem, grasses, trees, the flowering plants, they're all what we call producers because they make their own energy. They don't have to eat anything, which seems like a good idea. It'd be nice to just lay in the ocean like a piece of kelp and just bask in the sunlight and, oh, I'm eating so much sunlight right now. But I do love the taste of food, so maybe that wouldn't work for me. Guess you have to make up your own mind if you want to be a plant or not. Well, the plants, the seaweed, even the microalgae, that little tiny microscopic stuff, is taking that sunlight and making their own energy. So we say they're producers because they produce their own energy. And everything else that we've observed, Ricky was seeing the fish, other people were seeing the big and the little fish in there, they're consumers because they have to consume things for energy. Now we're starting to connect it. So let's take a look at this other exhibit. This is another example of a kelp forest exhibit. This is our Northern Gallery preview exhibit. This is one of my favorites, not only because that fish likes to play in the bubbles, but this is one of the few spaces we have live seaweed in. Seaweed's kind of tough to take care of inside an aquarium. It needs a lot of water flow, it needs light, the right temperatures, nutrients to help make it grow and be stable. Just like if I was taking care of a plant on my back patio at my house. I'd have to make sure I'm giving it all the things it needs to grow. Well, since this isn't the ocean, it's not quite the same for seaweed. So we don't have as much live seaweed as maybe other aquariums might, but we do get the opportunity to collect some and bring them in to our exhibits where we can. So this seaweed, or the plastic version in this one, because the fish don't know. Shh, don't tell them. The plastic version makes the fish think that it's real, but then we don't have to worry about taking care of the live seaweed. We can focus on the fish in here. But we kind of skipped a couple levels. So we have the seaweed that makes the energy. That's the first level. Well, fish eat things, but do the fish really eat the seaweed? Sometimes, but not that much. There's got to be something in between fish and seaweed. What could be around the seafloor in our exhibit space, but not a fish? Let's see if you can come up with some guesses for Allie. Ooh. Now, they're kind of hard to see in this exhibit, because this is actually a very large exhibit. They're kind of hiding in the back. There's one right there. Get out of the way, fish. Ah, there it is. What is that? It's a sea star. Good job. Well, there's other things that live on the floor, too. One of them actually likes to eat seaweed. It looks like a little spiny ball. The sea urchins. Sea urchins, like this purple sea urchin, love to eat seaweed. They don't really eat the whole thing. They can. We actually feed the leaf-like parts of our urchin seaweed. This is actually called a blade on a seaweed, not a leaf. And the urchins will eat the blades. They'll actually eat the nematocysts, the little floaty parts. They'll eat the stipe, which looks like the stem in the middle. But out in the ocean, it's not like they're going to be floating around, flying through the water, land on the top of the seaweed. Did you notice all these weird little things sticking up? They don't look like the spines, do they? They're feet. They have feet all over their body. Everywhere around their body. They have feet. So they crawl around on the sea floor or the walls and the rocks and things. You can actually see a couple in the background here hanging out with this other sea urchin. And from there, they crawl over to the bottom of that seaweed. Now, for the giant kelp, like we were looking at, it's called a holdfast. It's a anchor. Kind of looks like spaghetti or roots stuck to things, but it's just the anchoring part to the rock. So we have the fake holdfast in here, which is actually, it's like a plastic peg that we can shove into the rock so it stays down. But that is the holdfast. That's the part that things love to eat. Now, between the holdfast and the canopy layer of the seaweed, there's a whole lot of life in this food web. So the urchins, the stars, basically the little creepy crawlies that lie on the ground, they're kind of the first layer of consumers. Okay, well then something's got to eat them too, right? Because there's lots of different layers of things within this food web, the kelp forest habitat we're looking at. Well, what do you think would eat the stuff on the ground? Like the urchins or the stars, or even things like crabs, clams, mussels. What eats the stuff off the ground? Now, for us, eating something off the ground seems like it's gross, but in the ocean, that's normal. The food lives on the ground, so things have to go get them. Well, who eats urchins? They're cute and fluffy, and they make noises like an angry cat. You don't recognize the sound of a sea otter? Man, I love doing my impersonation of sea otters. It's kind of loud, and everybody else giggles when I do it. But it's really fun. So, oh, Oscar texted in that sea otters love urchins. Great job, Oscar. Sea otters are one of the many animals that actually will eat urchins. Sea otters we think of as the very top of the food web because, well, they're a big mammal. They have big, scary teeth. Well, they're not necessarily the top, but they are definitely the most important part of that food web. We call that a keystone species. So sea otters have a big diet. Sea otters eat a lot of the creatures that live on the ground. They're not the fastest swimmers. They could catch a fish, but they're going to waste a lot of energy for what they're doing. They have to eat over 25 to 30% of their body weight every day. Now, if you had to do that by catching fish, you're going to waste a lot of energy catching fish. When you could go down to the floor and be like, oh, this is mine. Oh, ooh, this is mine. Oh, and this is mine. And then you go up to the surface and you have a feast, just like this otter's doing. It's eating a crab. Now, it's not as easy as I made it out to be. The otters can't dive for very long either. Maybe 3 to 5 minutes. So in that 3 minutes, they can go down, sometimes over 100 feet, grab some seafood that they want, take it up to the surface, and eat it at the surface. Other mammals in the ocean, like sea lions or seals, might eat their food while they're still underwater. But sea otters pretty much have to bring it up to the top. They lay on their back. They crack open the shell with their favorite rock or seashell that they hide in their armpits because they got armpit pockets. And then they can eat their food. Well, the sea otter is not what we call the top predator because there still might be things that hunt sea otters. Orca have been recorded to hunt sea otters. So there are things, what we might say, above them in the chain, but they're still what we said was the most important. They're the keystone species. If they're not around to eat all the wide array of things, their huge diet, well, the food web's imbalanced. And their food, mostly the sea urchins, start to kind of take over because there's not much eating them, so they reproduce a lot. They start eating all the seaweed, and then there's no seaweed left. It's called an urchin baron. So when we start looking at the relationships between how things interact with each other, who eats what, where's the energy coming from, we can start to look at the balance of that food web. Now, even though they're not the top predator, they're probably one of the cutest. Now, Mason asked, how many feet do urchins have, and do they all have the same number of feet? Ooh, Mason, I don't know if I'd ever want to try and count the number of feet a sea urchin has. So I'm just going to guess it's between hundreds and thousands of feet. Not hundreds of thousands, but a few hundred to a few thousand feet or more, because their whole body's covered in it. And if they're a really big urchin, they have more feet. If they're a little tiny urchin, they don't have nearly as many feet, but their whole body's covered with feet. So great question, Mason. That's one of those things where somebody might try to count them. It's an interesting project, but there's not really a rule as to how many feet they should have or even how many spines that they should have. But as long as they have them all over, they are doing pretty good. Great question, Mason. So let's think of the things that our creatures in this food web are eating. We started with kelp and seaweed. Well, urchins eat some of that. Okay, well, the sea otter eats them. So that's a food chain. It's a single line we might draw in our food web that gets to the sea otter. But remember, well, sometimes orca are eating them too. So orca are now in our chain. Well, if we add multiple chains together, so instead of just one line, there's lots of branches that crisscross, because just like them, we eat lots of different things. We are an omnivore, omnivore. We eat whatever we can, plant or animal. Now, because of how we live, we can choose what we want to eat. Some things our bodies don't digest well, but we can choose what we want to eat. The animals sometimes learn what to feed on. Sea otters actually have to learn from their moms how to hunt. So if their mom taught them how to eat abalone and urchins, that's what they're going to eat. If their mom has never seen an abalone before, has no idea how to hunt an abalone, well, then that baby sea otter is not going to learn that either. They might later on in life, but generally, they're going to stick with whatever mom showed them how to do. So for us, we have a lot of variety of things we can eat, so that makes us more stable. So in all these branches of the food web, if there's not enough of it, it's kind of a weaker side of the food web, we can change what we're going to eat and pick something else. Well, if you don't have as many things that you can eat, abalone like to eat seaweed. They really can't eat anything else. If there's not enough seaweed for them to eat, and this could even be the little tiny seaweed, well, then that's going to be a problem because they don't have a wide variety of things their diet can hold, what they want to eat. So when you look at food chains and food webs, the more branches of what can eat what, the easier it's going to be if something disturbs that food web for them to recover. Let's keep thinking about who eats what in a kelp forest while I answer Brayden's question. Brayden's question is, do sharks and whales eat otters? Sharks might, but it depends on the shark and it depends on where the otters are. Otters aren't in a lot of areas that the big sharks would probably be able to eat them. Think of where otters live. They live in the kelp. Is there kelp always living out in the middle of the ocean where orcas are often found? Nope, there's only a specific group of orcas called the transient orca that travel up and down the coastline that might eat sea otters. So orca, while they can eat lots of different things, they're going to follow the same rule that the otters do. Only what mom eats is what they're going to be able to know how to eat. Mom teaches them how to hunt. So mom shows them what to eat. If they're an orca pod that really likes to eat seals and sea lions, they may not ever know how to hunt a sea otter. So that group might not ever meet a sea otter. But some orca do eat sea otters. Now, I think this is actually a picture of what are called the offshore orca. They eat sharks and rays. And that's all they know how to eat. There's other orca that are called a resident orca up in Washington and Canada that they only eat salmon. That's all they know how to eat. So they might be able to eat lots of things, but it really depends on what they know how to eat too. So if you can only eat one particular thing, remember, it's not as easy if there's a problem in your food web. If there's a storm, wipes away a lot of the seaweed or washes away a bunch of the urchins and things, if that otter knows how to eat more than just urchins, it's going to be okay. That otter can wait for urchins to repopulate while it eats sea stars or crabs or even other little things in the ocean. But if it only knows how to eat one thing, it's really dependent on that one population being there. Well, that's kind of where sea otters became really important to the food web and the food chain. If there's no otters, there's not a lot going on for everything that they eat, and they overpopulate. So we want sea otters in our ecosystem. That's what makes them a keystone species, is they're the most important member. Dempsey's asking, are any sea animals, vegetarians? Well, there you go. Okay. Urchins could eat other things. We've actually fed our urchins tiny krill. But normally they like to eat the seaweed. So they're technically an omnivore, but usually they'll be eating things like seaweed. Now, abalone are a true herbivore. They only eat seaweed and algae. They actually have a special tongue that's shaped like a scraping chainsaw that grinds off the seaweed from the rocks. They don't have teeth for chewing, they have teeth for scraping. Some of their cousins actually have some of the hardest teeth on the planet because they make their teeth out of the minerals and nutrients that they eat. So some of their cousins have metal teeth. That's kind of cool to think about. But these, I think they just have regular calcium-based teeth like we do. But they scrape the seaweed off the rocks. They're not going to be going, ooh, I don't have any seaweed today. You know what? I'll take some shrimp and clam. That's not how that works for them. So they're dependent on algae. If there's not the right kind of algae that they need to eat, not the right diversity or amount, that food web is then disrupted because now there's not enough abalone that might be able to eat. So the abalone population might go down, which can affect other things that eat them. Well, Otters love to eat abalone. There's other animals that'll eat abalone too. So there's some sharks that have teeth designed for cracking through shells. Now, a big abalone probably has a shell too thick for them, but little tiny abalone, lobsters might eat them. Maybe some sharks will find them and eat them. So it really depends on the size and age of your animal and kind of what their role is in the environment. So that's a lot of fun things going on. Now, this is one of my favorite animals. Thank you, Alicia. I love California sheephead because not only are they very interesting in how their life changes throughout their, the lifetime, how old they are, but they eat some interesting stuff. It might not look like it, but those are the jaws of a master predator. They eat urchins. Especially when they're the big males that have a big giant head too, because their head gets very big when they're large male. Their jaw is very powerful. Here we go. He's got big jaws. Their mouth is very powerful and can crack open the shells of urchins, possibly other small invertebrates or things without backbones on the sea floor. So this animal, unfortunately, is not a vegetarian at all, Dempsey. But when we talk about the animals, we don't really use the term vegetarian because vegetarian is a choice. We are choosing to only eat plant matter. Humans are omnivores. We could eat plants and animals, but we can choose not to eat animals. You shouldn't choose not to eat vegetables because those are good for you. Vitamins and stuff. But the animals, if they only eat plant stuff, not them, the abalone, they are called herbivores. And then this sheephead wrasse is a carnivore. Now, they help with the sea urchin population, but they're also very special in how they reproduce. So their role in the environment, in the food web, is kind of different than the other fish. Now, there's a lot of fish that do this. What they do is they actually change sex during their lifetime. All wrasses hatch female, and then they will may turn into a male later on in life. This actually helps them have more babies than they could if they stayed male or female. So they can have more babies because they can do this. And what happens is if there's not a dominant male in the area, one of the dominant females will turn into a male. Sometimes there's a tussle, a competition of who is actually going to be the one that transitions into a male. This is kind of a younger male. So the females are all pinkish orange. Actually a very beautiful color. So a lot more like this color in the middle, but add a little bit more like orange sickle color to it. But the males get this black head, a black tail, and this kind of pinkish white color in the middle. And they turn into that shape and that coloration. So that's how we know we have a large mature male. That other picture is kind of an immature male. And it's just whether or not they are sexually mature, they can have babies yet. But because they can change sex during their lifetime, it actually helps them reproduce more often and with more potential to have more babies. There's other fish that go the other direction. They start male and they switch to female. Clownfish do that. So with clownfish being able to switch sex, there they are. That helps them reproduce more often and have more babies potentially in their lifetime. So animals have some pretty interesting adaptations to find and gather food resources, reproduce as often as they possibly could. And then there's others like this big cutie. They are hatched very, very tiny. Even though this fish could get up to 500 or 600 pounds, it starts like this, almost a little bit bigger than the period at the end of a sentence. And then they grow this big. But they're very curious and special animals. When they're younger, yes, they are more susceptible to predation because they're small fish. Bigger animals can eat small fish. When they get to this size, there's not nearly as many predators that try to pick them off. Now, it must take a while for them to get up to about 500 pounds. Giant sea bass have human length lifespans. So to get this big and this beautiful, it could take them 20 to 30 years. But they can live 70 to 80 years, maybe more. So they have a very long lifespan. Other big fish, like our Queensland grouper that lives here, has maybe a 50 to 60 year lifespan, a little bit less than the giant sea bass. But that doesn't really come close to Darlene's question. Darlene's question is, what fish lives the longest? Well, Darlene, from the research and the evidence that scientists have gathered, none of them. Not even this one likes to spy on us. It must have heard us talking about it. Oh, hey. All right. They like to block the camera a lot of the time. Darlene, the longest living fish that we know of is probably the Greenland shark. They've been documented, I mean, they had to find evidence that nobody was recording this the whole time, living up to 400 years. That's pretty cool to think about. The Greenland shark that's alive right now was around in the year 1721, before the United States was the United States. That's just amazing to think about, that there's a fish that's been around that long and could still live longer. Now, we unfortunately can't figure this out while they're alive. There's ways that we can test it after they've passed away. But that's still really cool that fish can live so long. That's longer than even the longest lived mammal that I know of, and that's the bowhead whale. That's 200 years. Well, we have a few more minutes left in our program. If you do still have some questions, text us right here, 562-286-1838, or go ahead and email us some questions at live@lbaop.org. We'll be able to answer as many as we can during the program. If we can't get to them during the program, we'll get to them after the program. Now, Allie's got some more coming in. I saw her writing on a whiteboard. Are there any other members of a kelp forest habitat that you can see or think of that we haven't really talked about? One might be this little friend right here. That is not a sea bass, even though it's got the same colors. Yasmin's asking, the smallest fish... Oh, this is interesting. I think Allie looked this up for us because I didn't know it was this one. The smallest fish is the dwarf minnow. It only gets about 3 inches long when fully grown. Oh, 0.3. I couldn't see the decimal. It's so small. Just like a giant sea bass baby. All right, so 0.3 inches. That's this much. So if you imagine like this much of your thumb, is depending on how big your hands are, is about an inch, maybe a little bit longer than an inch. 1/3 of that is about that much. That's how big the dwarf minnow gets. Whereas the biggest fish would be the whale shark. Okay, so the whale shark is the biggest overall fish. They can get up to easily 40 feet long, but they're not the heaviest. The heaviest would be the mola mola, which can get, 4,000 pounds, 5,000 pounds? They're big. But they don't live necessarily in the kelp forest, where this leopard shark lives. This leopard shark might live in the same space as a California sheephead or the giant sea bass. The sheephead has different colors, doesn't it? So these colors help them hide in the kelp forest habitat from their prey and potentially their predators. But these patterns also break up your outline. So it's just like how we've figured out how to use camouflage. Camouflage makes it tougher to see that, you're what you are. If you can't quite see the shape of a shark, you're maybe not sure that it is a shark. If you can't tell that it's a giant sea bass, you don't know that it's that. But then there's the colors of the sheephead. Why would it be black and pink instead of fun patterns like the sheep or like the leopard shark or the giant sea bass? The sheephead doesn't have too many other predators that like to come after it because it does get pretty big. Remember those powerful jaws for breaking open sea urchins? Well, they're good at defending that fish too. So their color does still help break up their outline, because if it's kind of dark in the kelp forest, which it usually is, and all you can see is this middle section, you're not quite sure how big that animal is. But then big blotchy patterns on top of their body, just like the leopard shark, help break up their outline. So this does help them hide, even though they're kind of pink. But it's not going to be hiding in the same spot. So the sea bass, the leopard shark are hiding in the bottom of the kelp forest, where it's darker. This animal might be kind of in the midwater area, so it needs a little bit different camouflage. Now, the last question we have, it's going to be a good question. We actually talked about this a little bit during Allie's class, but we definitely want to retouch on it as to why do we know a fish is a fish? Because there's lots of different kinds of fish, aren't there? I think there's over 28,000 species of fish across the whole planet. So how do you know it's a fish? Oh. Well, the characteristics of fish are very important. They have gills, they have scales, they don't always have fins. Eels don't have fins. But if you find a fish, how do you know it lived to be 60 or 70 years old or 400? There's different ways to test it. With Greenland sharks, they actually test some of the parasites in their eyes. Yes, that's gross, but that's how it works. With whales, they actually test their earwax. Yeah, earwax. All the fun that you can have. So there's different ways that we can test how old animals get. In some cases, we have to test chemicals that are in their body, like radioactive isotopes. So if something was alive before World War II, they have actually different chemistry to their body. So that's one of the ways we can test also. There's also things like carbon dating we can actually do with animals that have been alive during our lifetime. There's a few different ways, but it's all very intense chemistry and science. So since we're out of time, we're not going to be able to talk about how that works. But do tune in on Wednesday for more fun programs. We won't talk about radioactive isotopes, but we're going to have more fun talking about science. So tune in on Wednesday. Now, if you're one of our teachers viewing in with us, go ahead and text into Allie the number of students you have watching. We do like to keep track of how many students are watching our program so that we can help keep track of that part of our community that are tuning in so we can provide content that works for everybody. So go ahead and text us your questions, or not your questions, your student numbers at 562-286-1838, and we'll see you all on Wednesday.